Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. How are you? Wanted to say first off, a belated happy birthday to the
You gotta sing
Bahamas
for me, Kendrick.
icon,
Stop.
Rogan
I
Smith.
that is man. Stop doing that.
Yeah, do the thing.
Well, you know
This is
what?
he's playing a song
Is he?
or a
Oh, I
drum
need my
roll.
headphones.
Drum roll.
The
Yeah.
facts.
Yeah.
I like that game. I didn't even hear it,
So
but thank you.
anyone who sees Rogan Smith, and she's going to hate what I'm about to say,
It was
give
yesterday.
her a hug. Give her a hug and say happy birthday. Give her a kiss. Say happy birthday.
I guess not.
You have my permission to do that.
Don't
And you'll
play with
know
me.
that you would have had the privilege, ladies and gentlemen, of hugging and kissing a real bona fide icon.
That day is over now.
Yeah. Well, once you say belated, that's what matters. And it could be 50, 60
Well, if they
days
don't,
later.
if they don't catch it today, don't.
I don't think
tomorrow.
belated has a time
It
period. I'm
you
sorry.
don't
Look
come
it
a
up.
year later.
Look
Don't
it
go
up. Go on your
belated
thing on
birthday.
your Google. It doesn't make. By the way, think of Google. Trump wants to control Google.
Yeah.
So they have a fix. When they pull up stuff on Trump, it's always negative. So now this guy, is he something like Mussolini and them?
Oh, for real, eh? Yeah.
You know, he
absolutely.
wants to get
Yeah.
Zucker, to
That's a
CNN
good
to fire
comparison.
their guy, the boss, because they have a deep hatred for him.
The media do have
Well, fine, but that's their problem. They can't fire anyone for that.
No. But I mean, I think they should be a little bit more professional in their
No,
dealings
I
with
think
him.
they should have hatred for
I
him.
think they can criticize him, but I think that they are. It's almost.
Well, he's out there
it's rude.
he's calling them fake. He's calling them fake and liars.
So so you do as he does.
No, but I mean, they're
Then
not gonna.
You've gone down to
It's
his
the whole
level.
thing is screwed up.
I would hold them to
Yeah.
a higher standard than Mr. Trump.
So McCain was buried in his first. By the way, I've decided I'm going to have 2 to 3 funerals as well, but I just put that on the side for now. But
You don't know what you're gonna have unless you're doing that while you're alive.
no, but I'm fixing that.
While you're alive?
Yeah, I'm saying that I want. That's what what do you call it? Saying in my
Tell your
last
family
wishes.
your last
I'm going to have
wishes
3 to 4,
burnt.
3 to 4 funerals, and I think that's
And
appropriate.
the purpose being what?
Well, just keep people happy. Now, the thing is this, right? Make sure I'm dead. That's one thing. I know most people they'll go to a tree to just make sure. Yeah, that's just make sure he's dead. But McCain was buried today, of course, as you know. My man, there was a thing floating around on WhatsApp about that. There's this guy who does things, but boy, if dead people hate you, boy, that's a serious thing. But it was about Trump not being invited. But
Do you know Obama though said that they were surprised that he asked for them to speak because they weren't close at all.
no, but they were former presidents, dignified. But it was also a dig. It's also a dig.
I think
It's a dig.
I think McCain was being intentional with that.
A dig.
That's what it was. But
Yeah. But they
I
weren't
don't-
close. But they weren't enemies.
they weren't enemies. They were on the
weren't-
opposite
yeah,
side
they
of
were
the
on
political
opposite side,
divide.
yeah.
But I mean,
But so was Biden. I mean, he wouldn't have known Obama that much. But it's always an honor, no matter how long, for a former president or a president to speak on your behalf. But he got Bush and he got, say, the guy on this, because he got George Bush, not Barbara Bush, George Bush Jr., George Bush Sr. So you got Reggie Bush. You got, Reggie Bush is a football player.
Yeah, I know.
You got all the Bushes.
yeah, but Sarah Palin wasn't invited.
Well, she wasn't not disinvited. She wasn't invited to speak, you mean?
She wasn't invited.
No, they didn't say don't come.
They didn't say come.
Anyone can come. You don't invite people to your
You
funeral.
invited Obama?
No, you asked him. You invited him to
invited
speak.
Obama.
You invited him to
And
speak.
inviting him to speak, you invite him.
Yeah, but that's the difference.
But my thing is, she's a former running mate of
Yeah.
his. Wouldn't you reach out and say, we'd want you here?
To speak? No, she should come. She should just come. She should be happy and say, don't come. That's what we working with. Okay? What I'm saying
don't
is,
know.
in a funeral, any funeral on the planet, you invite Ken to say a few words at your funeral. You invite Rogan Smith to say a few words at your funeral. You don't say, then you don't have a whole list of people who do not come. This is a face.
I just would imagine that somebody who would have been your vice
He hated
president would. I mean, he later admitted that he didn't.
Yeah, yeah.
He
He
was
made
he
a
had
big
chosen
mistake.
somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, but still.
Yeah. Listen, she is more than welcome. I'm saying this, Sarah, just in case you can
over.
hear it. No, there's another one. They got other ones.
Yeah, but he's
So she
gone
can come to
down
one.
now.
No, he ain't gone down. He going down in another. He got one in Arlington, the National Cathedral. That's where Obama will speak.
When is that going to be?
I don't know. I'm not following it that closely, but him and there's another one.
Oh.
That's why I say 1-3. I think he's having 2, and then he's going to be buried. I forget where. But she can come.
In Virginia.
Not Arlington, eh? There's an Air Force place, I think,
It's in
for
Virginia.
Air Force stuff. But yeah, no, he didn't disinvite her. He specifically singled out one man on the planet. And in fact, the one man on the planet, when he had to finally acknowledge, listen to this now, Rogan, I saw this. When he finally had to acknowledge, right, that where is it? See, Rogan.
Sarah Palin not invited to John McCain's memorial services.
Yeah, but it's not that she was not invited.
Yeah, but it's, again, I'm telling you the optics. You will make a big deal
So
of it.
how many people you know have invited people to funerals?
My family's invited people to funerals before. Say, Mama did or whatever. We want you to come. Mama would want you to be there. So-and-so would want you to be there.
Yeah, but you just assume you're coming. I'm not going to invite you to my funeral, Gad Smith.
And I ain't coming unless I invited.
No, well, then you're going to be there.
I'm
not inviting anyone. I guess no one's coming.
If your family doesn't invite me, I'm not coming.
I guess then no one's going to be there. I think that's why you put a thing in the paper on Thursdays. So people can know. Show up.
If I ain't invited, I ain't
people just come to your house, get this house. They ain't even.
I ain't coming to the house for no food afterwards.
You're saying you have to be invited for this house?
I'm saying I have to be invited to the funeral.
Well, I think you're on your own.
If you're family members, then I'm just coming.
I personally have never been invited to a funeral, and I've been to some.
You shouldn't have shown up because they didn't want you there.
And I don't know of anyone who's been invited to funerals. You know how I can prove it? Hallmark does not have a funeral invitation card.
Now I need to talk to Hallmark because I can write for them.
Yeah, they do not have a funeral invitation card.
I can write that for
them. And if there was such a thing, Hallmark will be on that.
I will talk to them about that.
Okay, so
Sue
you're wrong.
directly, as Bateman say.
Yeah, that isn't a thing.
I'm telling you.
It's not a thing. Rogan, how many funerals have you been invited to?
A couple.
Why would you sit there and look at me?
I'm telling. Oh my God.
Who's invited you to a funeral?
I can't just remember off the top of my head. But I've been invited. I've had people say, Rogan, I'd like for you to come to so-and-so's funeral.
But you were probably going to go.
No, I wasn't. Because I need to be invited. If it's family, listen to me. I'm not going to take liberties and just show up to someone's funeral. If it's a family member or a super close friend, yes, I'm going.
Do you would say that in our thing, let's just talk about me and you. Let's go me and you. You need to be invited to my funeral?
Yes.
Okay,
because I would imagine that your family...
Don't bother then. Don't bother. Hey,
I ain't bothering.
No, because no one's going to invite you. There's not going to be any invitations.
Your family might want to keep it small.
Listen, if they want to keep it small, this is what they do. We're keeping it small. That's what they do. Okay? But if they don't say we're keeping it small, and they put the thing on Thursdays, and they say interment... Okay?
Well, you're being cremated.
If they say funeral services at... Okay?
I must just show up.
That's what... Because I can assure you they're not inviting anyone.
That's fine for you all. Period. I don't know why keep... That's
what
fine
I'm saying
for
to you is,
everybody else. That is not me.
You're saying that all the people that would come to the funeral... But listen, make sure specifically
people don't invite folks to funerals, and people invite folks to funerals. That might not be the norm for some people.
I'm trying to say, I get that. I understand your thing now.
I don't want so-and-so to my funeral when I die.
That's disinviting.
Yes.
I'm saying to you that I get your thing about the invitation, but I'm saying that in a case where no invitations are going out.
No, I don't need no invitations.
You're saying that you need to, out of all the non-invitations, you need to be singled out and say, you know what?
I don't want to
just call that
one
there because you know she's crazy. Invite her. Okay? I think you put a little seat by invitation only. We'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here. As a matter of priority, I need to make this public announcement first. In addition to the belated happy birthday to Miss Rogan Smith, I'd like to publicly and whatever else Lee they do.
Whatever else Lee.
To invite, on behalf of myself and my family, Miss Rogan Smith to my funeral. Mm-hmm. Everyone else, when you see the announcement in the paper, it's general admission. You don't need to worry about
VIP?
Yeah. But no, you're special. Okay? So there will be a special section for the invitees of one of them chairs with the two arm.
Yes.
Yeah, and the side in the corner somewhere. This just for you, okay? And they'll walk you up. They'll have a little rope across the front, okay? So I'm inviting you.
So now I'll come.
Yes.
Because then I'll say before he passed, he asked me to be there.
And guess what? I'm coming to your funeral, whether you invite me or disinvite me.
I was gonna say
I'm coming.
You're
so it don't matter.
invited.
I don't make a scene. I don't give a damn. Okay. You're dead.
You ain't even gonna know when that happened, but anyway.
I'm gonna know when you're dead.
You ain't gonna know when that happened.
Well, I'll be probably dead first.
That's true.
So there you have it. Anyway, that's it. But going back to this thing with the Trumpster. So then now just staying in. By the way, our guest this afternoon is the governor of the central bank, John Rawls. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. I have a lot to ask him about KYC and where we're going. There's a new thing going on now about
with the digital currency.
Well, the principle, knowing beneficial owners and all kinds of. They're just every day is a new rule. So what I was going to say to you is the guy in Florida. His name is I want to say it's Andrew. I think it's Andrew Gillum. Yeah. So Andrew Gillum was. There were 4 people running for the Democratic nominee. There was Gillum, there was Graham, there was Levine, and there was Green. The only reason I know them is because they're TV commercials.
Oh, I was thinking it was Ryman.
No, because of commercials. Mm-hmm. So Gillum, no one really was checking for him.
Until
the brother. Mm-hmm. Okay? They wasn't checking. They figure Graham or Green or Levine might have been. Graham is the daughter of Bob Graham, the former governor and senator from Florida. Very popular. So next thing you know, Brother Gillum, who went to FAMU, won. He's the mayor of Tallahassee, by the way. Which means, Florida is a 75% white state. Yeah. So that means, 75%. So if you get the win,
that means a lot of white folks voted for you.
The votes were, if I remember correctly, 34%, 30% or 31%, and then some other percentages. So if you figure, okay, you got to get, if it's 25% non-white, not all of them voted for him, so you got to get at least 15%. You had to get at least 15% of the white vote, right? So the reality is he won. Then on the other side, this guy named Ron DeSantis was a Republican nominee who in his commercials was doing like showing his son building the wall. Say, I'm reading from the book of Trump. He was reading a story from the book of Trump. He's a Trump guy. The next day, he won. He won the primary for the Republicans. He says to Florida voters, now you voters, don't monkey this up in the election. Now, let me just say once again, like we were talking about our friend and using the words recuse and okay. Even if that's not what you meant, if you are running for an election, every single word that comes out of your mouth has to be vetted and screened. You talk slow, and as you're going, well, don't mess this up. You take the monkey and you turn it into a mess.
Yeah.
Because you got to know what word coming out next.
Yeah. And you have to know the impact that word in particular will have.
When you're dealing with a brother.
A black person.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So he under some serious thing. And now, of course, all the brothers showed up to vote. Okay. Because you call us monkey. You see? And then that extended to the Hispanics and then people who are white who were offended by it. Yeah. But it's going to get nasty. It's going to get nasty.
We'll see how it plays out in November.
So anyway, lots going on in the U.S. side of things. What's going on down here?
Well, the thing I wanted to talk, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that with your thoughts. We had that conversation.
No, I don't mind talking about it. It's again. See, listen, I don't know what the intent is here, but you're the chairman.
We're talking about Dr. Donovan Moxey, newly appointed chairman of BPL's remarks, of course, when asked if his company. I think his company had approached BPL to provide some services, and he said he doesn't see a problem with it as long as he recuses himself from the meetings where they would determine that.
And there's some people, and let me just say this, and this is not a defense, there's some people who may honestly believe that. It's like what's his name, Sessions recuses himself from the goings on of the thing, right? But here's the deal with me on this. You've got to be, first of all, acutely aware of what's going on now. Okay, of the climate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you got to be aware of the
entire
climate.
Controversy about this.
About the mere fact that the previous board, all of those who were removed, both factions of that board were accusing each other of conflict of interest. Okay, so you've got to be aware of that. So you've got to make sure that you're kind of toned in to what's going on. And that was just, I think
it was just it was honestly, it was in poor taste. And I mean, obviously, you think, even if that's what he harbored in his mind, that there's nothing wrong with it as long as I recuse.
And not only that, listen, you know what? These are things that, especially in your first days, right? It's like the monkey up thing, right?
You need to be incredibly careful and
you have to take a lot of counsel. So you've got to call. Let me tell you a story, and I'm going to say it on the air. We have a radio show, okay? Now, obviously, from time to time, we have sponsors.
Yeah.
Okay? From time to time, there may be a controversy. We could have any one of our sponsors may have a controversy. That in itself is not, the fact that we have them as a sponsor is not a conflict of interest. What would be a conflict of interest if we don't talk about it? Okay? But to knowingly go in ahead of time. So, for instance, and I will reveal this, we approached and were approached by various entities, I don't have to say who, about getting sponsorship. I know that regardless of what could happen in the future, that I was engaged with these people in negotiations for certain things, for certain benefits. Okay? We were very close to signing it, and then, I literally said, I don't think that's going to come off right. Because the thing about conflict of interest, it's the perception that's more important than the reality.
It's both to me.
Well, I mean,
it's both.
Well, the thing is, why I say perception is this. You could theoretically be doing something and you do recuse yourself or whatever, and you're not involved in the decision at all, okay? Not at all. But the fact that people have this perception of it is more important. But obviously both are important. But I'm just saying what overrules everything is because it may not be a conflict. You may not have a conflict at all. But as soon as it's a perception, that's the time to move. Okay? So I called the person up right before and I said, on second thought, I think it'll probably be best to not go down that road because of the previous relationship we have, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And that's not even government money. You know what I mean? So
I don't know, when we had a conversation early on about one particular sponsor.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that conversation. I was like, I don't know if I'd want that sponsor because I don't want, if something happens with that sponsor, for us to have to be kind of
talking about. I mean, that's the point. You wouldn't want to tiptoe around it.
Yeah, I don't want to tiptoe around it. It just we look stupid.
See, I wouldn't, and I had no problem with doing it because we wouldn't tiptoe. We would have to make very clear we're not tiptoeing. I'm even more concerned about when you're in business with someone. When you're literally in business, you're getting, and so it's a very ticklish thing. So so I don't know. I just it's like I see things every single day, and I'm sure you do as well, right? And you say, wonder why that decision was made. It's very difficult to go through life and make the right decision all the time, right? But when you are in a position to, especially in that public domain, that's the game. You got to be ultra, super, duper responsible. Ultra responsible and ultra sensitive.
Cautious.
That's the word, actually.
Very cautious.
Very cautious.
Yeah.
Everyone's harping onto one word. And you know what? It's so bad, it's like this. If you say A and no one else picks up the context, that word A getting in the paper. And they're going to judge you on A, not the context. And you can't undo it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, another thing I wanted to chat about was this affordable homes program. I know you, well, actually, did you see Romine Pereira's comments about people not being able to qualify? Like, there's a great deal of interest in the program, but there were, oh my God, like a handful of people. I think it was like 9 people out of, how much was it? 60 who actually qualified.
Now tell me about it, because I'm going to be 1,000% honest. I'm not familiar with the program or the issue at times. So tell me what's going on.
So the government is offering these service-ready lots at a deep discount to Bahamians. I can't remember if it's just the armed services, like who are having it for now. So the people who are in the armed services, they get first dibs at these lots.
Okay.
They're like $15,000, I believe, and the majority of the people just couldn't even qualify for those. I mean, these are deeply discounted lots.
I mean, that's like almost kind of free.
That's like a giveaway.
Yeah.
Like a giveaway, and it's just to me, it just goes to show people just don't have the finances, or they're so
encumbered.
They're so encumbered. You know what I mean? You always hear these financial folks come on our show and say how the majority of these people's salaries are going to the banks or going to furniture stores, or the people just aren't saving properly. It could be a variety of reasons, but when you can't even come up with
a down payment for $15,000, which is $1,500.
$1,500 for 10%, and I don't think they have no closing costs and all that stuff affiliated.
You know, it's interesting because we have the governor of the central bank, and I don't know if he can hear us. But we have the governor of the central bank on this afternoon, and you talk about savings, and you've given me the skinny on this a lot of times. When you think about even those of us who say things are tight, and you look at what those of us who say that or don't say it have in terms of consumption items, right? You sometimes wonder how these decisions are made. At the same time, the economy, and this is what I would put to the governor, right? The economy is driven by consumption. If every single person saved and didn't spend except on necessities, right? Would that even put you in a worse situation? Because if the economy isn't thriving, then you don't have a job.
Yeah. You need people to spend.
So you need people to spend. Yeah. The question is, will spending on the right thing be an economic driver as much as spending on the wrong thing? I mean, it's a shift, right? So maybe the electronic stores goes out of business, but the banks are thriving. I don't know. It's an interesting question. We'll make sure to put to the governor. But I mean, But
it does go to spending habits too as well. I mean, yes, there are instances where people just are leveraged and to the hilt and they just can't afford it. I never want to forget those people, but I mean, but that's true. But sometimes people have unique circumstances. It could be a medical. So I don't like to broad brush those people. No. But I think.
But if you have vacation loans and TV,
I cannot stand these people taking if you cannot afford a vacation, why are you going away?
But this isn't here.
Why are you getting a loan to travel?
Sure. But this isn't only here. I remember I was at a Best Buy in the States, okay? And, they have all these plans. All these stores have these plans. And this woman was trying to qualify, and but one thing about the States, they only got to hit about 3 buttons. And they know your whole life, okay? And she was No. And she was trying to qualify for like a $750 item to finance it.
She couldn't qualify.
And I'm standing there behind her. And they're going, I'm sorry, ma'am, your credit thing didn't check out. And I'm thinking, for $750?
Yes, that's correct.
Because first of all, you know this. She knows this before she went in.
She's trying her luck.
But then she knows this, and she's now going to go finance a consumer item.
Yeah.
So the decisions are. I always tell people, don't single us out. We only need 300,000. Plenty of people in that world.
I got to talk about the people in my.
I know, but I'm just saying, don't think no,
it's not just us.
Yeah.
When I was away, I used to see a lot of especially when I was in college, a lot of these American Express and the visas and all these companies will come on campus and we'll give you this credit card and we'll get, you know what I mean? And people get suckered, and I'd be like, nope. Not interested.
Then of course
not interested.
We cannot discount the impact of gambling, and people being irresponsible. See, I have no problem with these things, but again, if you're going to be irresponsible, you're going to pay the price. You're going to pay the price. So that's so basically now they made these lots available, which I assume I imagine prior to that these lots were way out of reach.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When you say utility ready, that means they only have to hook up go pay the deposit for the light and all that. They ain't got to pay for no lines and stuff to come in, right?
I think it was a good program if they're thinking about people who want to become owners of this rock, owners of the Bahamas, have a little piece of the rock,
telling me,
they can't
so
afford
let me ask you. You said that it was made available to the armed services first.
Yes.
And only 9 out of them.
Out of the 60 applications that they received,
60.
were able to qualify.
So that's less. That's about 10%, a little over 10%. I wonder if it's opened up to a wider range of people. If it'll be,
Because I would buy one.
Would you? So do they care who buys it?
Now, my question is, I want to know if there are parameters, if there are restrictions
that you can't.
Like
I can buy 5.
Can I buy as many as I want?
Come on, 100.
No, can? No?
No.
Can I build something and rent it out to someone?
That shouldn't
I need to know all of that.
That shouldn't be.
If that's the case,
because you're back into slumlord action.
Then I don't know.
It should be reserved for people at a certain income level or below.
Okay.
who, blah, 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 and you're going to own or occupy.
Yeah.
Not Rogan, who want to put a 4 or 5 duplex.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
Okay? There's nothing wrong with it, but you can't get it for 50.
I wouldn't be a slum landlord.
But you can't get it for 15 grand. For you, we give it to you for 33. And you got to get your own utility. Okay?
I don't need to go to the government then.
Yeah, they ain't trying to get you back. And I hear about the government gives crown grant, for instance. People go to them and say, yeah, I want farm on this. Next thing you know, they got a complex or duplex. Not a duplex, a complex or duplex.
And not a piece.
Not a piece.
The
Well, they do. No. They farm for piece.
They say, I
farm. Just the farm. They have a piece edge. We'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith, who, again, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to officially, in the presence of you the people, invite her to my funeral, because otherwise she will not show up, not attend. Yeah.
That's correct.
So that's out there now. That pressure's off of you.
Yeah.
Okay, it's done.
I get it.
Yeah.
Thank
and
you.
if anyone, when you get to the funeral, if everyone says, well, you're not on the list, excuse me, you're not, no, you can say, call the people, the Tribune. Yeah. Tell them run the tape. You invite you on YouTube. Bring your YouTube. When you come, bring your YouTube thing. Like how when you go to the airport and they have the barcode. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just come with your YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Got you. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Roll is our guest, Mr. John Roll, Governor of Central Bank, who does his work in a unassuming, quiet way, and I assume gets a lot done. John, first of all, thanks for coming back. We've had you before.
Well, thank you, Ed, and good evening to you and Rogan.
Thank you. Good to have you back.
There's a couple of things I want to get into. There's a whole different range of things. But first, I want to talk about the central bank and its and what it does and its compatibility with fiscal policy. But what I'd like to do, because, people they throw these terms out and, no one understands them, including myself. If you could describe first and foremost to people, what is monetary policy and how does it differ, complement, or otherwise fiscal policy?
Well, the short answer is that it is policies that the central bank undertakes that are supposed to contribute to the economic well-being of the country. Mm-hmm. So it's really the policies that help support economic progress and growth. And from a central bank point of view, it means, for example, policies that influence inflation and the cost of living in a country, mm-hmm. well, in most countries. Mm-hmm. For us, also policies around the stability of our currency, mm-hmm. Policies around credit and the ability to borrow in the economy. Mm-hmm. When we look at all of those elements, in a case like the Bahamas, it is not so much just pursuing those as individual elements, but we define the Central Bank of the Bahamas' role in that context mm-hmm. as one of ensuring that things run smoothly, that we have a relative amount of stability in our economic operations. Mm-hmm. And stability for us, being a country that wants to maintain a fixed exchange rate or a dollar at 1-to-1 to the United States, stability mm-hmm. means that you do not lose control of your ability to maintain the fixed parity, because as soon as you lose the control over the fixed parity, what it amounts to then is, well, if the dollar changes in value, the cost of your imports go up. Mm-hmm. And a country like the Bahamas, if you lose control of the value of your currency, you will lose control over prices, because most of your prices are driven by what it costs to import things. So the stability that we're trying to maintain is that having the currency predictable and fixed, having prices relatively stable or no different from the trend, in this case, that is being experienced in the United States, so that everybody can focus on other things that matters.
Okay. So you said maintaining mm-hmm. control over the currency. How does one this is way out there for many people,
Yeah.
including myself, right? And the central banks, they got their own jargon and everyone's talking to each other. But the reality is, most people have the impression that we don't have control over our currency. That the reality is that external forces, recessions, all sorts of other things, depict are certainly our credit capacity. But how do we control our currency?
Well, we do have controls once we have the right guardrails in place, and one of those guardrails is exchange controls.
Mm-hmm.
But monetary policy is also about reacting to restore
Mm-hmm.
balance. So you get hit by something where you suddenly notice, say, for example, that you're losing foreign reserves. So you do something to stop the loss,
Right.
or to cause the reserves to increase. So for us, and I think I've mentioned this before, this is where credit comes in a country like the Bahamas. Ordinarily, the way we manage credit in the Bahamas, which is very important because there is a misperception that the central bank can wake up tomorrow and introduce a policy that makes it easier for you to borrow.
And I want to talk about that.
And
yeah.
you run out there and you borrow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way it works in the United States, but even in the United States, there are constraints. For us, the constraint is that when we tell you it's okay to borrow more, we also have to make sure, because you're going to borrow the money and you're going to spend it on imports, you're going to spend it on vacation, or you're going to invest the money and you're going to have to import the materials. We're also signaling to you that we're comfortable that when you borrow this extra amount, we're going to have the foreign exchange for you to spend it. And if I can't assure you that you have the foreign exchange, then that's going to limit how free I am to let you borrow. So we manage credit in the Bahamas such that it is always able to be accommodated in terms of the amount of foreign exchange that people can use their credit to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the credit element for the Bahamas. But separate from that, we also try to nudge the economy in the direction so that when you are borrowing, if you're investing, you're investing to get a return. And so in those cases, a country like the Bahamas, we want more of the investment to be in activities that help us earn more foreign exchange, or make us less dependent on foreign exchange.
Right.
And there are some things that I would say to that later. If the time permits.
Okay. Now I want to talk to you about this interest rate. There are people out there who say, to your point, there's a lot of liquidity in the system. There is. We just talked about. I don't know if you could hear in there that the fact that the people weren't even qualifying for these $15,000 lots, which obviously has to do with their ability to pay, etc. But the ability to pay also is dependent to some extent on the cost of those dollars. So if the interest rate goes down, the repayment amount goes down, and their capacity to borrow may increase. In that instance, for instance, in this scenario where it's land purchase, which means there's no pressure on imports, okay, buying land. Could the central bank institute a policy where interest rates, as it pertains to a specific segment of the economy, could they do something like that?
It would not be an approach that we would endorse, because then you are going to be introducing all kinds of administrative bottleneck, trying to look at individual transactions and determining whether it fits one category or the next. We do provide high-level signals about what the interest rate should be. So whenever the central bank changes its rate that it lends to commercial banks change. But we have a discount rate. The commercial banks change prime, and they change prime often in synchronization with when we change our discount rate. And so that's a signal to reduce rates. In the Bahamas, you do see that relationships, and most commonly on mortgages. And again, the signal there is usually that if mortgages are cheaper, then first of all, your monthly payment is less.
Right.
So that means you, on a given income, you can afford to pay a larger mortgage. So it makes mortgages more affordable. So that has happened. And again, even when you try to stimulate the economy in that fashion, you're still constrained by how quickly the economy can accommodate relative to the foreign exchange side, how it can accommodate the responses. Those are not necessarily issues at this time. In the Bahamas, you need to have more persons earning income in order to pay back a mortgage. Because income, if there is no income, it doesn't matter how cheap
That's true.
the facility is, you have nothing to repay. So one of the things that one has to address long term in terms of, or not long term, but near term and medium term in terms of people being able to get access to mortgage and to make the kind of purchases and investments with credit, is that they have to be in the position to be earning income. The other thing is that you're earning income, you believe that you can afford to pay back the loan, how do you persuade the bank that you're a safe person for them to take a chance with? Well, the banks are mostly concerned whether you can repay it and whether you have a good track record of honoring your obligations, because sometimes
people get paid,
the inability or the not paying the loan isn't because you can't pay it. It might be because you did not pay it. So there was some other reason. So banks need to know not just only whether you have the income, but whether you demonstrate the reliability and the trustworthiness based on your past to that they should take a chance on you. If they can't, then they are gonna make some extra allowances for how they lend to you. So, well, if I think this person this loan should be paid back in 10 years, and they're going to skip out on me by the 9th year, then I'd better price this such that on average, by year 9, I didn't get all my money back. Basically.
Are banks already sharing information? I know we talked about on the last show about the credit ratings agency, but are they already sharing information on customers?
Banks share information, I think, in a very suboptimal fashion right now. But
that's better than saying archaic.
But let me
saying archaic.
But before I explain that, I'll say this on the interest rate thing. So when I talked about the bank trying to find a way to recover it fast, if the banks are not able to tell clearly where you are in terms of your trustworthiness or ability to repay, then one of the ways you do that is you adjust interest rates up. Now, in a country like the Bahamas, if you don't have good information on the borrowers, then you charge higher average rates to all of the borrowers, because even though there may be those in subgroups who should be benefiting from lower interest rates or even larger loan amounts, the averages say this is as much as you should give people on average, unless you have some other way to separate them. And that is where the credit bureau comes in. The way the banks try to get some insights on whether you're a good prospect now is they'll say, well, do you have any loans on the outside?
Right.
You say, no, I don't have any loans. I just have this one. Okay, good. Let me see your job letter. Oh, it has some salary deductions, and these salary deductions for loans. So at least I know, based upon your salary deduction profile, you have a little bit, extra. So, well, to be safe for me, now I need a salary deduction or assignment so that I could not lose out. But then there's another problem. Some may have given you credit and not relied on your salary statement, so even your salary deduction slip might be misleading. And so, but beyond that, they may say, well, give me a reference letter from the other bank so that I know what you're like. You say, Ed is a good, faithful client. He has a facility with us in the low six-figure range and has been service satisfactory. So 6 figures goes anywhere from
100,000
to 10,000
to 900,000.
Is 900?
Yeah,
yes, 100 to 900,000, or in the low 5-figure range. So it goes now from 10,000 to 99,000. So So there's a little bit of coding in there, so people have to use that and try and triangulate as to what it means. But
it's not scientific.
That is the extent of your credit references. Now, there may be cases where you go into the bank and you say to the bank, well, I want you to tell the other guys what my loan amount is and maybe give some more details, or maybe I want you to give me a printout of my loan statement. Right. So those cases might exist, but in general, the credit references and the bank references that are given are very general. When you get to a credit bureau,
that's when you get into the
they're going to narrow that down now, and they are going to give you, in most cases, a credit score, which says, this person is based on their behavior, they're a high risk, low risk, or they're a great prospect to lend money, because that credit score is going to consider how faithful you are in repaying your loans, how indebted or burdened you are,
if you missed a payment, that sort of thing,
and all of that. And so that gives banks more insight. Plus, the framework for credit bureau will require that generally entities that are licensed and regulated providing you with credit, they must report to the credit bureau on what they're lending you and what your credit behavior is.
And it's in their interest to do so.
So, yes. Yeah. And so now, when the bank asks or they make the inquiry in these types of systems, they get to see, in most cases, identically what your credit exposure is, how much balance that you have on credit cards, how many credit cards you have. I'm just using the United States and others as an example.
They won't be I thought I read that everyone's going to be starting off with a clean slate, though. And so how does that impact? How will that impact things
we
moving forward?
We got to take a break.
Okay,
so let's on the outside we'll ask that question on the other side. Okay. That question. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here, along with the governor of the central bank, Mr. John Roll, who, this is very basic stuff for folks out there who want to understand this. Rogan, you were asking about the credit bureau.
Right. So I said I read, I don't remember where, this is a while back, that said that when this credit bureau comes on stream, your past payment history will not be documented. So it seems like you were starting with a fresh slate for when you're going out and seeking new loans. They're only going to have what? I need you to explain that.
There are two dimensions, and you will be missing one. You will be missing the payment history, because there's no efficient way to construct comparable payment histories for everybody in the system. You're then asking banks and other entities to go into their records and provide past records. However, there will be a disclosure of the amount of debt that the individual owes at that starting point. So if you have a relationship with an existing financial institution and they have a partial view of your borrowing behavior, at that point, each of those institutions now will be able to see not just what they know about your behavior with them, but they will know the sum amount of what you owe on the outside. For a lot of us, or I shouldn't say a lot of us, for some of us, there won't be any surprise for the financial institution because we honestly disclose that. Right. For the rest of us, financial institutions will realize that you already are in debt to the point that it is not safe to lend you anymore until you pay those down. So at least from that point of view, they will know a part of the picture. But we estimate that it will be a few years into the operation of the credit bureau before you get reliable information about payment history or debt servicing history. But that piece of the information, even if that is missing, the industry will from day one still be in a far superior position than they are today.
And not just the banking institutions, right? The furniture stores and whatnot, they'll be reporting as well?
I know that we have not defined every single entity that will be required to report, but all of the institutions that we see as being in a position where they're lending on a significant basis. So,
and they would want to report, because if they don't, they reducing the risk themselves. They want to be able to plug in when you go to get the furniture that you're a bad risk. The other thing too, talking about the zero thing, A 0 credit rating is almost as bad
Yeah,
because now you go to
in the
banks and they
States,
go,
it's
"You have no
horrible.
credit rating,
Nobody
so,
even
so
took the
we're not
chance to
lending you
give you
anything."
anything, right.
Yes, and there's something that I think should be very clearly stated to persons. We get this story that, well, you don't have a credit history, therefore you can't
clear.
qualify for a loan.
Oh, okay.
So the way we interpret that is saying, well, you're telling me that I should go there and take on a bunch of
Right.
debt just to get more
Disapprove.
debt. Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
If a person treats a credit card, for example, just like cash, meaning that you spend against a credit card and you repay it, and you don't accumulate balances, you're also building up a
Yes,
credit history.
That's true.
So from the standpoint of the ways that one has to build up credit history, in many cases there are transactions where credit is involved, but the debt is immediately paid off at the next payment, and individuals are not accumulating interest costs on debt or late payment fees.
But if you're paying like I don't pay my credit cards off on the next payment, not
No,
all
that's
of them.
what that means.
But if you're paying them on regularly and not late with payments, etc.
Even then, that's good.
That's good,
That works to your
Yeah,
advantage.
yeah.
But the point is
that would be more of a burden issue when you have the
point is
balances.
that you do not have to carry a burden of credit in
Right.
order to demonstrate that you have a credit history.
Okay.
Just show that where you have access to credit, such as a credit card, that you do faithfully and consistently pay the
That's
debt.
how most people
and
get their
and the
credit
best
histories
advice
anyway.
that is given to those who have credit cards is, try to have as small a balance as possible.
Yeah. Because otherwise, the balance is a part of your burden.
Yes.
You see, so you have two things: the rating or your payment history, but you also have a debt burden that you have to account for.
So will this credit, sorry, this is my last question with this, but is this going to be tied to our social
National
security
insurance.
card, national insurance card, like how it's in the States?
For a credit rating system to be effective, your identity has to be,
Unique.
reliable and unique in that system. So in most countries, if not all countries, your social security number, which for us is a national insurance number, is a unique starting point. So if you reflect on when you apply for a passport, when you got a driver's license, and some of the other information, when you open up accounts at most banks, etc., the national insurance number is one of those identification that you may have provided.
And that's why it's important to get one of those from birth.
And unless something was in error on it, your national insurance number has not changed since the day you got it. But your passport number has changed, so has your driver's license, and even your bank account numbers have changed.
Right. I want to skip just a second. Well, first of all, before we go past that, what's the timeline on this? I mean, is it just something that's gonna just float for a while because it's so intricate to get involved? I mean,
we started the process of trying to identify the firm that will operate the credit bureau. We started that process late in the spring of this year, and that happened just after the government finally brought the Credit Bureau Act into law. We were supposed to have, by the end of July, gotten to the point where we're either concluded or almost concluded with identifying the operator. That process is nearing conclusion now, during the month of August and going into September. And we are working with the International Financial Corporation, which is IFC. This is an extension of the World Bank. So they're giving us some technical guidance because they've worked with many countries over the years in going through this process. And what that means is that they're giving us the kind of pointers as to what we should be looking for in these proposals that were put forward technically, and also helping us through the initial stages of setting up the structure, how we will supervise the credit bureau. Because after we've appointed and licensed the credit bureau operator, more importantly now is the supervision of the credit bureau operator.
How common are these in the Caribbean? Are they?
I believe that they're not as widespread as we would like. I know the Bahamas is making progress, and there may be 2 or 3 other countries that are already operating with credit bureau. I can't recall directly, but I know that it's not as widespread as the Caribbean would like.
And so the question I ask then is, and this is the final question on that, is what does this do to enhance our economic environment?
It does a lot. First of all, if you have banks that are weak, then the assumption is that it's a vulnerability for the government in terms of the cost, because weak banks often are banks that are exposed because of the credit that they provided and not being able to use the right information on who are good credit prospects. So having a credit bureau puts it in a better position over the next decade for our banks to sort out,
more stabilized,
the safer versus the riskier prospects for loans, and to price those loans. And if you can sort that out better, then it means that where there are legitimately lower risk individuals, they will get access to credit at cheaper cost on average than if you can't separate them.
Right.
So that means those types of individuals will be in a better position. Of course, there will be the slice of the population who you discover, are bad prospects. So the incentive is now for them to improve their behavior and to demonstrate the improvement in the behavior so that they can have access. Other than that, you'd find that you're encountering rejections more often, or you're encountering higher rates, or even reduced dollar amounts. So really the incentive for those individuals is to try and improve their behavior so that they keep the access that they have.
So let's go to my favorite topic, and of course yours by osmosis, KYC.
Yes.
Know your customer. Now it's amazing, one of the things about this country, and I take the full responsibility as well for this, is when things aren't going well, there's a lot of noise. But when things get, calmed down, we just move to another subject. We don't acknowledge, we don't do anything, we just move to another subject.
So I'll give a high-level plug for some international engagement of the central bank. Yesterday, I signed off on a letter to the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, which is a global network of countries that are committed to promoting financial inclusion. And in that group, there's something called the Maya Declaration. I think it's Maya Mexico. And it's about countries committing to reforms and effort to increase inclusion and access in financial services. So that's an overarching theme that we are promoting. And the KYC reforms, I call them clarification in many cases, that we've been pushing, really is about financial inclusion, making it easier for persons to get access to banking services, because we say if they are in the banks, then they're not holding the cash under the mattress. And if everybody understands that there's no cash under the mattress, then there is no home break-in or robberies or vandalization to find cash. So we want to, through financial inclusion, reduce the vulnerabilities and the exclusion of persons when they're only using cash.
Okay. So we now have, and I don't know if people know this, I think this was in April sometime, and probably maybe before, the Central Bank of the Bahamas did a reform of the guidelines, if I'm correct, John, of the guidelines recommending to financial institutions with regard to how the criteria for opening up accounts and starting and getting financial services. So whereas before the passport was like the linchpin of everything, that is now an option.
Yes. So what we did was, first of all, recognize that we do want to make this country more effective in preventing and putting barricades in place against money laundering and other criminal abuses. But what we're saying to the financial institution is that a part of the process in which we protect our system is how we monitor transactions once individuals are a part of the system.
Reporting Act.
So, aside from that, we're saying, and that is a process that's based upon how risky customers are, and how risky the process is in terms of whether you understand what's going on. That is not the same as identifying the persons in order to admit them to a deposit account or a facility. So what we said is that, and then we're saying also in terms of risk, let's make the distinction between somebody who's wealthy and opening up a bank account, or who's earning six figures, low or high six figures, and or as opposed to the person who's earning low five figures, even on a annual basis, if they're lucky. And let's try to distinguish between the risk that those persons pose as agents of crime or money laundering. Once you've identified the individual, we said in most cases, you will know as much as you need to know to give them an account. And in those cases, you should.
But you can still monitor the account.
You can monitor the account. And what we're saying too is that if the person is a taxi driver, gardener, I'm just using these as an example, a domestic worker or someone like that nature, they're probably depositing a few $100s a week into an account, and by the end of the year, since they're basically living off most of what they're earning, they probably still haven't accumulated much in the account. So from that point of view, they use these accounts, to facilitate their transactions and just existence. If they're low risk, give them access to the facilities, monitor it, and and definitely you should know, because if you demonstrate that you do not know, there are recourses in the system such as sanctions and fines, but you should know when to raise the flag when you see suspicious activities happening on a person's account. So the monitoring side is very important. But what we say is that if you have a Bahamian passport and you go into the bank, that's good enough. You can open up an account with a Bahamian passport.
You don't need 50 million things. You don't need your address, all that kind of stuff.
We say that banks should know how to contact you.
Right.
Now, how do you get contacted today?
I have a phone number. Smartphone.
Okay.
Yeah, you can ring me right there through my phone.
Or email.
You set a verifiable email or phone contact.
Yeah. They can still, and they should still collect your mailing or residential address.
But they have to have a utility bill.
Yes. We have to acknowledge that in the Bahamas, if we say that you must be able to contact Ed or Rogan, in some cases, depending on how I try to contact you, you might find out about it 3 weeks or 3 months later, as opposed to just the phone call or the email.
If you go to the PO, that's 6 months.
I didn't say anything. No, but the point is that contact.
You see the difference between our friend. Very diplomatic, very cautious.
But what we stress there is contact. Now, and then we say, okay, there are going to be cases where persons don't have a passport.
Listen, we got to take. Don't just hold that. We're going to take the break, and then we come back because it's very important stuff. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here, along with John Roll, and there's so much other things I want to talk to you about, but this is an important one because I don't think the average Bahamian is equipped with this information, John. Everyone knew that there was an horrendous process to go and open an account. You had to have a passport, it had to be current. If it expired, you got to. For instance, if my passport expires, am I required by the bank to update that passport in their system?
It is not a requirement. What we've said is that once a customer is identified, they are identified.
Yeah, so because my passport expired, I didn't die too.
Yeah, so if you use some means of identifying yourself and establishing a relationship, that doesn't invalidate the relationship or invalidate your identity later. So that is a clarification that we've made. And then we've also said that if persons come in and they're not able to rely on a passport, then they can rely on two combinations of government issued photo ID, which in the case of the Bahamas you have national insurance and driver's license most commonly. We did not put the voter's card in that list because the Bahamian voters card still hasn't
Manipulate that.
Digitized,
evolved to be
yeah.
tamper-proof. But
And not everyone has a voter's card.
we
Yeah.
also included in that list national identity cards because some persons have national ID cards. We
Right.
included work permit, because
Right.
work permit,
Right.
photo ID, and
Right.
spousal permit.
Uh-huh.
We also provided additional clarification recently that we're not asking banks when persons present themselves to open up account to verify that they have a work permit. So if a person is presenting a work permit at a bank, they're presenting it as an identification,
Right.
not as an exchange control requirement that
Okay.
to show that they
Have to be
have
Bahamian
to be a
citizen.
Bahamian.
Yeah, yeah.
So we made that clear, and so we said that just to simplify the administrative process, if individuals are presenting themselves and they're opening up accounts and putting Bahamian dollar deposits or funding those for Bahamian dollars, that as long as those facilities are operating and they never exceed a balance of 50,000, then the central bank will not become involved in terms of having to give an exchange control authorization for the facilities. Now, when I said 50,000, I didn't mean you walk into the bank and you deposit 50,000. Get that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because if you deposit
Yeah.
50,000, there are a bunch of
Yeah,
other
yeah.
regulations that
Yeah.
will be triggered.
Yeah.
That is somebody who's probably taken years
To accumulate that.
accumulate their savings to reach that
Or
level.
for some other reason, which
Yes.
you need to check.
So, and the point there is that depending on the situation, banks will be more curious about, your source of wealth or
Yeah.
your source of
Where
income.
you get that from,
Yeah.
Rogan.
And then we also
my Wrangler.
we also added the simplification to say, and this is neither Ed or Rogan, it's not me. We said that there are persons in the Bahamas, who do not have or who may not have photo ID. This isn't the person who left the driver's license at home and has to go back home for.
They ain't got no car.
They ain't got whatever. They may not be driving, but
Yeah.
they maybe they didn't get around to getting the NIB card, or they only have the one piece.
Uh-huh.
You can use your birth certificate in combination with one
Right,
of those
yeah. So
common
it's either
IDs.
or. Yeah.
Right.
But how? Let me ask you, Rogan Smith, how much were you aware of these reforms?
Yeah, I knew about them.
Because I kind of
I
We-
did.
some
we-
stuff.
And they've been doing well
Yeah,
with
'cause I
printing
haven't-
things in the paper
Okay,
as well.
good.
We know that it is a gradual process. What was most important at first is, I think, first of all, to equip the public with it,
Right.
with the information, and to insist on the strategy that whenever you make these kinds of changes, you put them in writing.
Yeah.
Right.
So even if we're not doing a good job on the financial institution side of pushing the information down, at least when you confront the financial institution with the information,
Uh-huh.
They can't say,
they
well,
can
this
get
is
it
central bank.
verified.
Because you know that was doing that
Yeah,
too.
we get
They
a
have
lot.
yeah,
We
yeah.
get a lot of links,
printed.
and it happens from time to time.
Can they go against your guidelines? If you have guidelines, can they say
Yeah,
that we
I
have
was gonna
additional
ask that.
guidelines?
We say that in the cases where other elements of risk may be present, you can escalate the kinds of process that you do to on board. Say, but there is no additional way by which you can identify a person. Once you've identified them, it doesn't matter how risky they are.
Yeah.
That means they should be then looking at other due diligence, and maybe in that case there's more curiosity around your employment,
Yeah.
and therefore let me
Your
get
source
some
of income,
confidence
yeah.
that you are going to be
Yeah.
honestly earning the sort of deposits that you
Yeah.
are going to be placing in there. A taxi driver, a straw vendor, or a fisherman is self-employed. So the notion that you would present a job letter if you're one of those
I'm employed
doesn't
by
exist. So, but the bottom line is that depending on the level of activity that you are taking through the account, yes, the institution may want to have more comfort around the fact that you are not taking prohibitive activities of funds through the account.
Right.
But for the majority of persons, we're saying, who are going into the banks as Bahamian residents with low value transactions, that doesn't define high risk.
Right.
And a part of the system, if it's going to work, is getting better and better at discriminating between when risky or more risky situations present themselves.
Right.
And that's where we want to build more and more focus and attention in the banking system. It's going to take time, but we have to make a start.
Okay. John Roll, let me ask you, from your perspective, as just these reforms, because obviously a lot of this doesn't still apply to high-level accounts. I just went through a process of opening an account. Listen to this now. The account was open. We've been using this account for 20 years. Someone left the organization, and so we had to replace the name. We had to take Roganne Smith, put her on, take John Roll off. When we did that, they discovered they didn't have their file. I am telling you, and I consider myself to be at least a B, the process and the requirements to open that account or to reactivate that account was like worse than the SAT, GRE, LCAT, LMAT, washing mat, laundromat, all that together. It literally took months.
Oh, my God.
Now, where are we in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of people coming into this country, trying to open up accounts, etc.?
The identification system will address that partially, but the identification system provides the greatest amount of convenience for the individual. You should be identified similarly if you're acting as an officer of a corporation. Now, if you're coming in there as a part of an organization, a financial institution is also going to try to determine, or will have to determine, that your business is legitimate and regularized.
Especially if it has multiple layers.
So going in there with a company structure, then it means now the financial institution is going to want to know a lot about the company. Even sometimes, they want to know about your board of directors and officials who are not signing on the account. And so that is a process that gets drawn out. Some of that, I think, relates to communication and disclosure of what requirements are, and not having to be told 2 weeks later or a week later that you need another piece of document that you could have provided
everything
at day one. So I think there's some of those issues that would help to promote efficiencies. But part of what we did... Are we
worse off than other countries, so with that? I mean, in terms of if I go to the U.S. or to the U.K. or to Jamaica as a company and want to open up an account, or Cayman, is it more or less laborious or the same as it is here?
I can't speak directly to that, but I know that Caribbean-wide there have been complaints around individuals and persons and the process that they go through to open up accounts. So we do know that what we've done in the Bahamas does address that issue. On the enterprise side, I think there are lots of reforms that we can do, such as with digital or e-government, that can help, because financial institutions have to verify a lot of times the information that they receive, or to have good confidence that the information is reliable. So to the extent that the authority for information, in many cases government or government records, that those records perhaps can progress to being digital or electronic, in theory, something could be presented to a financial institution, and the means could exist for the financial institution to independently and electronically verify the information.
Very expeditiously.
So we have to begin to look at a lot of the reforms that are for e-government along the lines that, to the extent that that information that is needed by the financial institution can be instantly, independently verified, it can happen. And I use the example of the United States and others. A lot of times, the individual gets access to services by just providing their social security number, because once they have that, they're able to query your existence in many systems at once and build your profile. We don't have that integration yet in the Bahamas, and so you have to construct that, and it has to be verified in many cases. So we need to get beyond that.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I want to ask you something. Just recently, of course, July of this year, the government put out its budget, which is we've had, former governors on and other persons in the financial sector. And while I'm not going to ask you to grade the budget in any way, I'm going to ask you how central bank policy as an independent agency of government, specifically charged with managing the monetary policy, et cetera, the budget obviously affects many things as it relates to the central bank's activities. How do you see this particular budget working in tandem, or for that matter, in contradiction to that which the central bank would maybe try to achieve?
Well, for the central bank, the priority for us, which we endorse in terms of the spirit of the budget, is that government deficits need to be put on a trend of reduction over time, because deficits in government, particularly when government deficits are not tied directly to government investments or returns from government investment, those deficits are tied to borrowing, which means either that we are building up debt, which could require use of our foreign exchange earnings to service, or that there is debt and borrowing that has to compete with the private sector for those. So we favor an approach where the government is trying to become more healthy in its finances. So from that standpoint, I think we like that theme in the budget. What we want, though, because the idea and the recognition of having good health in the government finances has been around for a very long time. What we want is to also see the concrete measures that will deliver upon it. So to the extent that we're talking about fiscal responsibility legislation and how that helps the framework, that is good. To the extent that you have a framework and an intention to improve the financial management system, that is good. Debt management, we're working actively with the government to help strengthen the debt management framework. So we are investing in the Central Securities Depository, which is going to manage government debt more efficiently. And the elements of the budget that speak to the digital transformation, we have a direct vested interest in that, because we've said to the government, you need to deliver on the digital identification, national digital identification system. We can work together because we want that to be used, if nothing else, first for the financial services sector, so that they can have, this even more superior identification infrastructure for transaction, and it will plug into how we move in terms of having a digital currency, because the digital base for doing those types of transactions is also always relying on the comfort around the identification of the person.
Okay, 2 quick questions before we go. One, we're a country like most countries in this hemisphere our economy is based on consumption.
Yes.
Have you seen, are there any indications so far, I mean, we're only really gone maybe 1 quarter, of the impact of the increase of VAT on consumption? Or is it too early to tell?
No, it's too early. But I think we do have to be, very careful to distinguish between adjustments that happen in economies generally when taxes increase, and the alternative when a country doesn't make the adjustments and the cost is greater long term. So if you increase taxes, yes, there could be some belt tightening on the margin, but to the extent that your economy is growing or is transitioning to growing in a healthier fashion, then that also provides a cushion for some of the adjustments.
Okay. So, yeah. Right. And final question is, the central bank is engaged in relocation at some point along the road. That's certainly not a secret. And I think I asked you this earlier, but how far are you along with that project? I know the site is chosen, correct?
Yes, so right now we've completed the process of getting the design concept for a new central bank building, and the very next step for us is to to have the government go through the process of conveying the land to the central bank.
Okay,
You know.
okay.
And once that is done, we should be in the position to accelerate forward in terms of setting ourselves up to construct
On the break
a
ground.
new central bank building. And the preference, and I think it's becoming subconsciously accepted in the population, the preference is for the Royal Victoria Garden
Right.
site.
And you know, one good thing I can say about the central bank building, in the previous, when it was first built, it made a statement as a central part of our downtown, and I assume that this will be the same type of iconic stature.
I mean, that is certainly the intention, and I think we were quite pleased with the designs that were put forward, and as well as the bold stance that the judges and others took in terms of choosing a structure that sort of drew out the symbol of the sand dollar
Right,
for the central bank. So we think that should go over well. Plus, in the design process, we wanted to be very mindful of climate issues, and having a structure that can stand up to hurricanes effectively, and so we see some of that coming across even just in the visual representation.
Okay. Listen, Mr. John Roll, always very interesting. A topic that isn't easily discussed, but you make it simple so the average guy on the street can understand. And the main thing is, you know, you can go and open that account a little easier thanks to John Roll and his cohorts at the central bank nowadays compared to years previous. Thanks, John, for coming by. And hopefully we'll see you in the next cycle.
No, and thank you very much too, Ed Regan. And I'd just like to encourage the persons in the public to, you know, just inquire on the central bank website and elsewhere. And occasionally, if you feel compelled, you should bring things to the attention of your banks that you know is in conflict with positions that the central bank has taken.
I know you know that I won't have any problem doing that, sir.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
Ken,
you.
Rogan,
Yes,
see you Monday.